Okay, so now what we're doing is we're recording this, okay? And particularly, as I mentioned, Professor Grimes will be back on Monday, and I'm going to be up here till Friday. What we're going to do is we're going to try to put as much wrappings as we can about talking about graphics user interface, okay? And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about, because everyone's always, one of the things you wonder is that why is there a separate type of program that you use for graphics user interface, okay? Because what we're doing is keep in mind is that when you're doing programming, all right, any type of programming, we're moving from what's called procedural type of programming, where there is basically a whole program that does everything that you want to do in result of an app or anything like that, okay? And that's the old way that we used to program, all right? What we do is that we provide what we call modularity. And modularity is to break up the processing into little parts, so that particularly you can call this code multiple times, or instead of just having to go in and write a very large program, where in that very large program you are particularly writing everything. And then in a lot of cases, when you do multiple things, you just keep repeating and repeating and repeating the code. And procedural languages finally got it, and they had things like subroutines. Okay, all right. And so as we start this modularity, okay, all right, we kind of take away the functionality. Or I mean, we kind of take away this procedural, and what we do is we try to break it up in terms of functionality. All right. So let's just take just a simple example of a website. Okay. All right. What you're seeing here, okay, is information that is when I brought this website up, okay? Basically is that what you do is you see the information as it is at this particular time, or at the point where you entered that website, okay? All right? And what you do is that particularly you go in and as the program, you basically take what the steady state or the state of the entire type of information that you're going to use and what it looks like right now. Okay. All right. And what that is that what you're seeing now is a thing called a view. Okay. And basically, that's what you're doing with your GUI interface. You're breaking down the view. Okay. And the view gives that capability, okay, of describing what is on this page. All right. Now, what's on this page, okay, is data, is information, okay? And it's information in a format, okay? And when you write a program, that information, okay, is stored so that it can be pulled into the view so the end user could see it, okay? All right? And that method of building that information, okay, is called the model. That's the way you model the data, okay, all right? when you build a database, when you build a file, when you do initiation or you set the variables in your program, okay? You're building the model, okay? All right. Now, within the program, okay, all right, during the program, because, you know, when I go on to Amazon and I order multiple things, I always do all the time, okay, all right, I go in there and it gives me a chance to select something from an inventory, okay, it gives me a price, it checks out, it takes my credit card, it takes the money out of my credit card or my bank account, okay, and what happens is that it comes back with a different view, okay, on the fact that that model has changed, okay? And the manner of dealing with those changes is called the controller, okay? So again, we have this thing called, when we specifically, every time you learn about and I actually pulled the textbook that Professor Grimes recommended, okay? And I looked, and at the very beginning, when they talked about Java Swing, and Java Swing being used as a view component of the model view controller, okay? They initially talked about model view controller, and you can't talk about model view controller, okay, or graphics user interface without actually talking about model view controller. And that's the reason that Swing comes in place. I introduced to you a LinkedIn Learning, okay, program about learning Java with Swing, okay? And particularly, okay, is that this is a good way of actually, instead of reading or looking at a presentation, this is a video presentation of what we're talking about, okay? And particularly, you notice that this particular LinkedIn Learning course, okay, and keep in mind is that if you're an IST, okay, and I tell all my folks this, I tell every one of my classes on this, okay, if you're an IST, okay, the technology changes every 6 months or less, okay? And there's always new technologies here. The good thing about LinkedIn Learning is the fact that particularly you have that capability of having some supplemental information that you can do to try to review how to be able to do this. You got your book, you got the presentations we show you, and now I'm introducing this to you as being something that you can look at, okay? Now, again, this is dealing with Swing. Swing is a graphics user interface set of classes or a set of libraries that are used to be able to define, components, containers, layouts, and events, okay, that particularly you look at when you're setting up a graphics user interface, because those are all the potential things that you use, okay? But guess what? Surprise, surprise, okay, all right? When you look at the basics, okay, of Swing, okay, this video talks about model view controller architecture, okay? Because keep in mind, all right, is that in IST 440, specifically in 440, okay, all you're doing is you're writing little programs, okay, to do certain things, okay? And when you start to think about things like maybe doing object orientation programming, where you have to define classes, and those classes then have to be instantiated in, or an instance of that class comes into being an object. Okay, you sit there and you say, well, you know what? Why do I have to do all this stuff? Okay, why do I have to build a separate graphics user interface? Okay, all right. Why do I have to build a graphics user interface being the view? And why do I have to build a model when I could just run it into one big program and it would work? Or in terms of just a small little program that goes in there and actually goes in and says, set up a button, click the button, and it says, click me. And then you said, you just click me. Why do you need to go through all these procedures? Well, what happens is you're learning the base of a series of applications that are going to be developed. Okay, and those applications, okay, are in an internet set, especially with Web 2.0, is the fact that you're going out to multiple different types of programs with multiple different types of programming languages. All right, and what you're doing is you have to have some type of interface point to do that. Okay, if you follow a set of rules, okay, like Java Swing, of actually going in and being able to set, the way that we go in and view things. And keep in mind, we also have a set of rules where, and particularly are now things that are standard, okay, through our standards groups of the way we should display data. That's called human-computer interaction, and it's a thing called user experience, user interface, okay? So we have specific standards that go to this, okay? But to build a model, all right, we have a set of standards, and particularly that set of standards is driven in a language like Java, okay? Where particularly what you need to do is you need to do this separation, and it builds modularity as you build all these codes and try to interface with all these distributed applications that you need to use, okay? So that's what Model View Controller does for you. It breaks it down into smaller pieces and provides modularity so that you can reuse the code and you can plug and play this code, all right? So let's look at this concept, okay, of Model View and Controller. Okay. Model View Controller. All right, now, so let's start to think about this, okay? All right, just really even thinking about building a GUI interface, okay? All right, what you do at the very beginning, okay, is that you want to represent the components data, okay? And when you build a graphics user interface, okay, you're building a representation of that data, okay? You're setting up a button, okay? You're setting up a sliding, a slider or something like that that generates data, okay? You may have a button that does one selection, and then based off it, you can do multiple selections okay, on a checklist. All right. So what you can do is be able to do that. And that's the model being done that. Okay. And then what you do is you set up that representation of that data. And what happens is that at the very beginning of the program, okay, you actually go in and you view that data. You give that user the opportunity to view that data in its initial state defined by the model. Okay. So then the user does something and the state changes, the model changes. Okay. Those changes are processed by the controller. And the controller then updates the model, and then the view is updated with the state changes. Okay. And we do this every day. Okay. We do this every day, and there is a button that basically goes in and handles this MVC type of thing. Okay. And what it is in the top left corner, you see a circle button. See that circle button? It refreshes the screen for what it's changed. Okay. Now you're not going to see it that much on here because this is just kind of an information pattern. Okay. But what you've done, what you've seen, okay, is that this is the representation of the current state. All right. And then what happens is that built by the model, okay, and represented from the model to the view that the user is seeing. Okay. All right. You then put in what's called event handling. Okay. That basically says what happens when one of those components are being used for that view. Okay. And one of the components is saying refresh the screen. Okay. So what you do is you click that button and it refreshes the screen. Okay. Now, if the model changed, all right, if the model changed, then the view would also change, and that change is handled by the controller. Okay. Now, you sit there and say, well, what's he really talking about here? Okay. This seems like, why we're doing that. But when you do architecture, okay, when you get to an advanced class where you're starting to take, you start to model what businesses are doing, okay, and you go in and you particularly have what businesses are doing, which we call processes, okay, and those processes get bent down to procedures, okay. Those procedures are applications, and those procedures can either be done manually, okay, like how we used to do things, or we could automate it. When you automate it, you've got to run programs that automate that. Because keep in mind, back to the basics, okay? You input data, okay? You process it, okay? You input that data, you set a state change, you process it based off of that state change, and then you output information, okay? Because, say you're updating your address, all right, or someone asks you to provide your address, okay, all right, they know that maybe you're a new user, and as a new user, you basically have to provide them that information, okay? The view gives you that information, or at least that representation, where you can start to input your name, your address, your email, your telephone number, or maybe your credit card information. And then when you hit a button, okay, there is an event change, and that event change is picked up by the controller. All right. And then the model that represents the data of basically a table that has your name, your phone number, your name, your address, your phone number, your credit card information is stored there. Okay. And that model is changed, but is changed by the controller that handles that specific event that you're using when you're basically going in and doing the program. Okay, so this takes it a little bit step further, okay? Because every software application, okay, does model a situation, all right? Okay, and that model is what's called an abstract representation. And you see that it's kind of a base generic representation of what that data is, particularly initially. But that abstract grows into more pertinent, more dynamic, more robust information, okay, to be able to show that representation. And that those changes in that model, in that abstract model that you have, okay, all right, are changed by the controller, because when you select a button or you select an information that you can put into a graphics user interface and you hit that submit, then the controller takes over, okay? Basically, it causes that model to change, and then any type of change is thrown back to the view, okay? Because the model's changed, so they're showing you what the model looks like after the controller took over. Yeah, see, that's also important, okay? Because now you're looking at the fact that, you know, you're using multiple views. You know, you could not only be the only, you're not the only person that's looking at this information, okay? All right. When you try to order something and you ordered that, and that inventory has changed, okay? Another user is going to say, uh-oh, someone else has ordered this, that inventory has decreased to 1. And again, that changes the view of that other user. And it's the controller, okay, that shows that specific thing. See, what had happened when we did procedural languages, okay, is that the model, the view, the controller functionality was in that one procedural language, okay? And you do that when you write simple programs, all right? You go in and at the very beginning, okay, of the program, all right, you basically set up what the model's going to be by going in and defining your variables, okay, all right? Then what happens is that when you start to throw a graphics user interface in it, like using the swing components, all right, you basically go in and you build a graphic user interface, again, that shows that model, okay? And then after that, okay, all right, you actually go in and you do some actions like add, okay, and we talk, and I don't know if I mentioned in this class, I was talking to the other class about it, is we do this thing called CRUD, okay? CRUD being create, read, okay? All right, yeah, I'm sorry, CRUD. Create, read, update, okay, delete, and execute, okay? So that's what the acronym kind of goes through, okay? So in essence, when you're writing a program, you're doing a CRUD type of situation. You're either creating, you're reading, you're updating, you're deleting, or you're executing on that model, okay? And that's what the controller is really doing. Okay, I'm going to stop that there. Okay, so that kind of puts into perspective, okay, what we've been talking about all this week. Okay, all right, and particularly, okay, in our first lesson, okay, all right, we went in and we built a simple graphics user interface, okay? That's a view, okay? All right, you're basically going in and showing the user what the state of the model is, all right, okay? And what you do is you build some type of representation using a program called Swing, all right? And also using it in conjunction with Abstract Windows Toolkit that was the precursor, okay, the beginning precursor to Swing, okay, all right? You have components that give you the ability to build that view and have the capability of building something that could then kick off something on the controller that would update the model. All right, okay? And particularly, you use these things called components that have containers that hold the specific components that you have, all right, to build that graphics user interface, okay? All right, and you build frames that can do that. Now, what you do is that you go in and particularly you pull a set of classes that come from, from various, from this library, which we call Swing, okay, and AWT, all right? So what you do is you pull that information and you set up, you're here going in and setting the way that the view is going to be represented, all right? And you can also set the size based off of another class, another component that you can use, all right? Okay, and then, as part of being able to do of controlling, and it's not part of the controller, but it is in the sense of actually going in and handling that, is being able to go in and do something when you know, and I showed you that refresh component. All right. Okay. So particularly have that and you build that information. So at the end of the day, as they say, okay, all right, what you're going to do in your first program, program 24, okay, is basically you're just building a simple view. Okay. All right. The next step that you do is getting able to go in and manipulate these components, because in the first program you ran, okay, there was all it was a blank slate with some information. Okay, it wasn't a blank slate. It just basically was, you know, some information that you got that said, this is what this is, but there wasn't a lot of things inside of it, okay? Because keep in mind, that's what the old, when you look at before Web 2.0, okay? In Web 2.0, all it was that first thing. You were getting a web page that just gave you information, all right? Web 2.0 gives you that capability of not only seeing that information, but interfacing with that information. And that's what you do when you start to use all these labels and text fields, because you're going to set those up so that they can be something that the user can use, okay, to control how, or to be able to set up how the controller is going to go back and change that model based off of your input, okay? All right. And particularly, you know, there's when you start to get to these components, okay, and you really look at a list. If you went on the web and you looked at the list of all these components, there's a ton of components. All right. Okay. There are, you know, there's a myriad of components that you can use, but those used to be able to set up that view so that you could put this together. Okay. And again, going to the end of the day, okay, all right, what you're doing is now you're taking that display, okay, you're pulling some information from an existing source, which could be a model, okay, all right? And what you're doing is you're providing some information back to that view, okay, that's set up by the controller, okay? And particularly what you're doing is you're reading some disk space and then say, give me, you do a calculation, okay, within that program of saying is that that amount of free space is a percentage of the allocated space, okay? So that's program 25, okay? Okay, and now what you do is to even go further, okay, is that you want to make it more relevant to the user. You want to make it, because again, what I told you about user interaction, user experience, because you're dealing with the user experience, okay, is you want to make it a little bit relevant, okay? You want to add some options of being able to do, instead of just one thing, a choice of multiple things, all right? And then what you do is that you can take a demo panel, all right, and then particularly do some, some color representation, okay, of what you want this to do. Because if it's red, yellow, white, or blue, maybe you have a foreign person that basically doesn't understand what in English, okay, what red is, what white is, and what blue is. But in the user experience, you give the ability of red, white, and blue, okay? So what you're doing is you're enhancing, you're going to that human-computer interface, okay? And you're enhancing that experience, all right? So that not only are you giving them choices, but what you're doing is you're throwing in some color coding, all right? And particularly, you have that capability of setting the way that the way that the buttons are set up, because because remember we talked about that, if you don't set the spot with the layout of where the button's going to be, it's going to put it in its own manner. It's probably going to put it at the very center at the top. Okay, but here you want to put it down at the bottom. Okay, so that's what the layout manager does for you. Okay, all right. So then basically what you're doing in that third program that you use is that you're putting a little bit of user experience into it by using layout manager. Okay, all right. That we're going to stop there because we're out of our time. Go in here. First of all, let me stop my share. And let's stop my recording. Okay.